He walked through the crowded school hallway, his backpack hanging loosely from one shoulder. Students moved past him quickly, laughing and talking to each other, their voices echoing off the walls. He kept his eyes down, careful not to draw attention. For most kids, school was a place to show off, to be loud, to fit in. For him, it was a place to survive each day quietly. He wasn't sure anyone noticed he existed, and somehow, that was comforting. He wasn't like the others, where they talked about the latest trends, games, or gossip. He thought about music. Even when he wasn't playing, music was always with him. He could hear it in the rhythm of footsteps, the patterns of raindrops on the roof, and the soft hum of the air conditioner in the classroom. No one else seemed to notice these things, and that was fine. Music was his own secret world. At lunchtime, he sat alone at the corner of the cafeteria. Tables were crowded with groups of friends sharing jokes and stories, the air filled with laughter and the clattering of trays. He pulled out a small notebook from his backpack, one worn at the edges filled with scribbled melodies and chords. While other kids were scrolling on phones or eating quickly to join their friends, he was drawing music notes, tapping invisible keys in the air, and sometimes quietly humming. It was something that kept him calm, something that made the noisy world around him feel a little softer. Some kids noticed his habits and thought them strange. They whispered to each other when he walked by, laughing softly, calling him odd. But he didn't care. He had learned early that most people would never understand him, and that was okay. The world had enough noise already. Music was different. Music listened to him and spoke back in ways words never could. In class, he sat in the back, often avoiding eye contact with the teacher. While other students were showing off answers or asking for help, he watched patterns in the sunlight on the floor, noticed how the shadows shifted during the day, and imagined how each sound in the classroom could be part of a song. Sometimes when the teacher asked a question, he hesitated, unsure if he wanted to speak. The words never felt strong enough. But in music, every note he played had meaning. Every melody was honest. No one could argue with that. Even teachers who noticed him didn't fully understand him. One teacher had once suggested he'd participate more in class activities, thinking it would help him fit in. But when he tried, it felt forced. Talking for the sake of being noticed didn't appeal to him. He had a voice, but it was different. It came out in the way he tapped rhythms on his desk during quiet moments, or when he whispered a tune under his breath, most like a secret. Recess was no different. Kids ran in groups, shouting and pushing each other in play. He wandered to the edge of the playground, finding a quiet spot under a tree. Sometimes he watched a single leaf fall, listening to the soft sound as it touched the ground, imagining a song inspired by it. The other kids didn't notice him. They never had. Sometimes he wondered if it was better that way. He didn't need their attention. He needed music, and music never judged. At home, the routine was similar. He lived in a small apartment with his parents, who were kind but busy. They often worried about school and grades, not noticing the melodies he played in his mind. He had a small keyboard tucked into the corner of his room, old but functional. When the house was quiet, he would sit and play. Hours could pass without him realizing it. The sounds he created were rich, layered, and full of feeling. On his keyboard, he was not the quiet, overlooked boy from school. He was something more, something powerful. Even his neighbors, used to hearing the faint hums and taps from his apartment, didn't really know who he was. They might see him running errands or walking to school, quiet and unassuming, but the music he carried with him never escaped. It was a private world, a world he nurtured carefully. Back at school, the quiet routine continued. He noticed the small things others overlooked, the rhythm of the cafeteria noise, the tone of someone's voice as they complained about homework, the pattern of footsteps echoing down the hallways. Each observation added to his mental notebook of sounds, little pieces that could someday become music. Sometimes he tapped these rhythms out on his desk or hummed softly, careful not to draw attention. Some students occasionally tried to talk to him, often asking odd questions or making fun of his quiet nature. He would answer politely, always calm, never defensive. Their laughter didn't bother him. It was empty sound, like noise in a song that didn't belong. He knew it, and he let it pass. His focus was elsewhere. He knew there was something inside him that mattered more than fitting in. More than the fleeting opinions of classmates. There were moments of loneliness, of course. Sitting alone during lunch, walking through the crowded hallways. He sometimes wished someone understood him, someone who could hear the music in his mind and not laugh. But these moments didn't last long. Music was always there to fill the gaps. A melody could lift his spirits when words failed, could make him feel seen even if no one else noticed. One day, while walking home, he stopped to listen to the wind passing through the trees. He noticed how it created a soft, rhythmic sound, almost like the whisper of drums. A small smile appeared on his face. He pulled out his notebook and began sketching notes, imagining how it could be turned into a piece of music. The world around him faded. For those few moments, there was only him and the music, even though no one at school knew it. He had been practicing secretly for years. His fingers had memorized scales and chords, and his mind had composed songs that no one had ever heard. The world might have laughed at him if they knew, but he didn't play for them. He played for the feeling, for the expression, for the way music could speak when words could not. His reputation at school remained the same. Quiet, overlooked, a bit strange. He didn't mind. He knew his talent wasn't about recognition. It was about truth. And truth, he believed, had its own way of making itself known. One day, someone would listen, really listen, and then the music would speak for itself. For now, he moved through the school day with patience. He attended classes, completed assignments, and kept mostly to himself. He observed the world quietly, always noticing patterns, rhythms, and melodies. It was not an easy life in a place that valued noise over thought, popularity over skill, but he had something the others didn't. A connection to something deep, something eternal, something that could never be mocked or taken away. And so, he walked the crowded hallways, sat in the corner at lunch, and listened. Every footstep, every whisper, every laugh became part of his secret world. And in that world, he was not invisible. He was a composer, a creator, a boy with music flowing through him. Waiting for the moment when the world would finally hear, he did not know when that moment would come. He only knew he would keep walking, keep observing, and keep playing in his mind. Music was patient, and so was he. One day, everything might change, but until then, he was content to live quietly in the rhythm of his own world, unnoticed by most, but alive in every note he imagined. The next week, the school announced a small talent show. It was nothing big, just a chance for students to perform in front of a few teachers and classmates during the assembly. Most kids were excited, planning skits, dances, or singing popular songs. The boy hesitated at first. He had never thought about performing in front of anyone. Music was private, something personal. But a teacher noticed him quietly tapping rhythms on his desk and suggested, in a kind but firm way, that he consider participating. "It would be good for you to show your talent," she said, and he felt a mix of fear and curiosity. He agreed, but quietly, without telling anyone. For him, even the idea of playing in front of others was intimidating. What if they laughed? What if they didn't care? But deep down, he wanted to try. Music had always been his voice, and maybe it was time for the world to hear. In the following days, whispers started. A few students noticed that he had signed up for the talent show. Some found it amusing. They laughed quietly to each other, imagining the quiet boy trying to perform. They shared guesses about what he would do, mocking him for being unusual. He overheard some of it but tried to ignore them, focusing instead on preparing his piece. Each day he went to the music room during lunch breaks, practicing quietly on the small piano there, letting the music guide him. His hands trembled slightly as he touched the keys at first. The room was empty except for him, but still, the act of performing, even in practice, made his heart race. He repeated his piece over and over, listening carefully to each note, adjusting and correcting mistakes. Slowly, confidence grew. Each practice session brought more certainty, and a sense of calm washed over him. Music was no longer just a comfort. It became his strength, Meanwhile, the other students continued to gossip. Some called him names quietly in the hallways, saying he had no talent, that he would make a fool of himself. A few dared each other to come and watch, expecting a disaster. Their laughter was cruel, but casual, like they didn't even realize it was directed at a human being with feelings. Despite this, he stayed focused. He knew that they didn't understand, and that was okay. Music was not for them. It was for him. At home, he spent hours after school preparing. He experimented with different melodies, trying variations until they felt right. He recorded himself on a small phone, listening back critically, noticing things that could be better. His parents occasionally peeked into his room, curious about the sounds but not interfering. They were supportive in a quiet way, giving him space to develop his skill. The boy appreciated it. Encouragement without pressure was exactly what he needed. The day before the talent show, he felt a mix of excitement and fear. Every time he thought about standing in front of an audience, his stomach tightened. He practiced in his room, then in the empty hallway, imagining the faces of classmates and teachers. He could almost hear the whispers, the laughs, and it made him nervous. But he told himself repeatedly, music was his voice. He would not let fear stop him. He would let the music speak. On the morning of the show, the boy walked into school, carrying his calm determination like armor. He could feel the tension building in the hallways. Students were talking more than usual, gossiping about who would perform, what they would wear, who would get attention. He tried to avoid their eyes, keeping his head down. Some smirked as he passed, their laughter subtle but cutting. Each smirk reminded him of how different he was, but also how much he cared about this moment. He had worked for it, and no amount of laughter would take that away. In the classroom, before the assembly, he sat quietly, focusing on the music in his mind. He tapped rhythms lightly on his desk, as if rehearsing in secret. Other performers were talking excitedly, sharing their plans, laughing with friends. The boy did not join in. He did not need to. His world was inside the notes, inside the melodies he had practiced for weeks. Teachers walked around, checking on students, noticing his calm focus. One teacher gave him an encouraging nod, and he felt a small surge of confidence. When it was time for his turn, he walked onto the stage. The hall was buzzing with noise. Students were chatting, some sneering, some whispering guesses about what he would do. A few of the louder students were ready to laugh, certain that this quiet boy would embarrass himself. He felt the heat of their gaze but ignored it. The piano sat in the center of the stage, old but functional. He approached it slowly, his hands hovering above the keys. For a moment he hesitated, taking a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of nerves inside. Then he started to play. At first, the notes were soft, hesitant, almost unsure. The laughter from the audience was quiet but present. Some students snickered, whispering, thinking the piece was awkward. But as he continued, the music began to change the atmosphere. Each note grew stronger, more confident, more expressive. The melodies spoke in ways that words could not. The whispers started to fade, replaced by curiosity. He lost himself in the music, no longer aware of the audience, no longer afraid of judgment. The boy's hands moved with growing certainty. He added flourishes, subtle dynamics, and emotions that drew the listeners in. The melody was simple, yet deep, carrying a sense of longing, hope, and quiet strength. Some students shifted in their seats, suddenly paying attention. The laughter stopped for a few, replaced by an unspoken wonder. Teachers exchanged glances, impressed by the unexpected talent unfolding before them. A few students, the ones who had mocked him most, leaned forward slightly, unable to look away. Their whispers died completely as the music captured their attention. Even the rowdiest corners of the hall fell silent. The boy, still focused on the keys, didn't notice their change in behavior. He was immersed in the world he had created with sound. A world that demanded attention, that commanded respect through beauty rather than words. As the piece continued, the emotions grew stronger. The soft, tentative beginning transformed into a rich, flowing melody. The room seemed to hold its breath. Every note was deliberate, every pause meaningful. The boy poured everything into the music, his fears, his hopes, his countless hours of practice. a quiet longing to be understood. It was as if the music had become him, and he had become the music. When the final note lingered in the air, there was a brief moment of stunned silence. No one moved. No one spoke. It was the kind of silence that felt heavy and full, the kind that carries awe. The boy lifted his hands from the keys slowly, taking in the quiet, not yet realizing the effect he had created. The students who had planned to laugh were frozen, their expressions a mix of shock and admiration. They had not expected this. None of them had. For the first time, the boy realized that his music could be seen, could be felt, and could even silence a crowd. It was not loud in the way other things were loud, but it was powerful in a deeper, more meaningful way. The whispers, the laughter, the mocking nit was all gone. In its place was attention, respect, and a quiet understanding that something extraordinary had just happened. He had taken the first step into a world where he could be seen not for being strange, not for being quiet, but for being true to himself through the music that had always been his companion. And in that moment, as he left the stage, he felt a new confidence. He knew the laughter of others no longer mattered. He had found a voice, a way to express himself that was undeniable. The next part of his journey was waiting, and the world, finally, has begun to notice. As he sat back down after his performance, the boy could feel the weight of all the eyes in the hall on him. For a moment, he wondered if they would laugh now, if someone would make a comment to break the spell he felt had been cast. But nothing happened. The audience was quiet, still listening to the echoes of the music he had just played. It was unlike anything he had experienced before. Some students shifted in their seats, uncertain of what to do next. Those who had expected embarrassment were now confused. Some even embarrassed themselves for having judged him so quickly. Teachers exchanged quiet nods and smiles, impressed by the depth and emotion the boy had managed to convey. The atmosphere was thick, almost tangible, as if the music had left a trace in the room. A lingering presence that refused to fade. He felt his heart pounding, but not with fear. It was excitement, a rush of something new and powerful. Music had always been personal, private. He had never imagined that it could touch others in such a profound way. It was the first time he truly understood that his gift had meaning outside his own world. As the next performer was called to the stage, the audience clapped politely, but the energy in the hall had shifted. Even the students who had been loud and rude seemed quieter, more thoughtful. Some whispered to each other, still not fully able to express what they felt. The boy, seated quietly, watched them out of the corner of his eye, a small smile forming. He hadn't played to win attention, but it had found him anyway. The boy's mind replayed the piece he had performed. Every note, every pause, every movement of his fingers across the keys had been deliberate. He remembered the countless hours spent practicing in his room, alone under the dim light, learning to translate the emotions inside him into something that could be heard and felt. That private struggle, that dedication, had finally revealed itself to the world, and he felt a quiet sense of triumph. After a few minutes, a teacher approached him. "That was extraordinary," she said softly, careful not to embarrass him. "You have a real talent. You should consider performing more often." The boy nodded, too overwhelmed for words. He had never received such sincere praise before, and it felt strange and wonderful at the same time. Meanwhile, some students began to gather courage. Walking over to him, asking questions about the music, how he had learned to play. It was tentative at first, a few awkward compliments here and there, but it was genuine. They were curious, no longer dismissive. The boy answered simply, explaining how he practiced, how music was always with him. He did not boast or exaggerate. It was just the truth, and the truth felt enough. As the assembly continued, the boy found himself paying less attention to the other performances. His mind was still caught in the wake of his own music, in the reactions of the audience. The laughter and whispers that had once surrounded him seemed like a distant memory. In their place was something new. Recognition, not loud and forceful, but subtle and sincere. It was more powerful than anything he had imagined. By the end of the assembly, whispers of admiration were spreading quietly through the halls. Students who had once mocked him were now cautious in their tone, some even hesitant to speak in jest about him again. A few of the teachers made notes, talking quietly about encouraging him to join the school music program. The boy noticed this but remained calm. The attention did not change who he was. It simply acknowledged the music that had always been a part of him. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Students seemed to look at him differently, some with newfound respect, some with curiosity, and others with quiet regret for having judged him before. He walked through the hallways, head held a little higher, but not boastfully. His music had spoken for him. That was enough. In the quiet of the afternoon, he returned to the music room to play again. It's time for himself, not for an audience. His fingers moved confidently across the keys, creating melodies that reflected the mixture of relief, pride, and wonder he felt. The room seemed to embrace him, welcoming him back into his private world where he was both creator and listener. He thought about the reactions he had seen during the assembly. The silence, the disbelief, the admiration. He realized that while people's opinions had always been fleeting, the music he created was enduring. It could touch people in ways words could not. That knowledge filled him with a sense of purpose he had never felt before. That evening, he walked home slowly, replaying the day in his mind. Each step seemed lighter, as though the world itself had shifted slightly in response to what he had done. He imagined the faces of the students who had mocked him, now quiet, now thinking differently about him. And for the first time, he understood the power of expressing oneself fully, honestly, and without fear. At home, he spent hours at his keyboard, inspired by the events of the day. He experimented with new melodies, building on the confidence that had begun to grow inside him. The music was richer, more expressive, more daring than before. It was as if the validation from others had unlocked a door, showing him that the world could hear and feel what he had always known inside. Even the simplest notes felt significant now. He played quietly at first, then with increasing energy, letting the emotions guide him. The room seemed to resonate with his music, reflecting back the growth, the courage, and the hope that he had nurtured silently for so long. Throughout the evening, he thought about the journey that had brought him here, the lonely lunches, the quiet hallway walks, the endless hours of practice. Each challenge had prepared him for this moment. Each moment of doubt had strengthened his resolve. And now, after finally sharing his music, he felt ready for the next step, whatever it might be. As the night grew late, he sat back and listened to the last notes fade away. He realized that the world was changing for him, not because he had sought attention, but because he had stayed true to himself. The laughter and ridicule that once seemed so powerful had no hold over him anymore. He had discovered the quiet strength of being authentic, of letting his music speak, and that was more powerful than he had ever imagined. He went to bed that night with a sense of peace, a calm that he had never known before. His music had bridged the gap between his inner world and the outside world. And while he didn't know what tomorrow would bring, he understood one thing clearly. He had the power to create, to express, and to touch lives with the honesty of his art. And that power, he knew, would continue to grow. The next day at school, whispers of his performance spread quickly. Students talked in hushed tones in the hallways, some still in disbelief about what they had seen and heard the day before. The boy walked through the crowded halls as usual, head down, careful not to draw attention, though he felt the subtle change in the air. A few students glanced at him with newfound curiosity instead of mockery. Some teachers smiled quietly as he passed, acknowledging his presence in a way they hadn't before. That morning, the school announced that another small assembly would take place. This time, a celebration for students, showing talent in any form. The boy had been invited to perform again, not just as a participant, but as someone whose performance had been remarkable. When he heard this, a wave of nerves and anticipation hit him, stronger than anything he had felt before. He had not sought recognition, but now he was stepping into it, unsure of what to expect. As he prepared backstage, the noise of the audience filled the hall. Students chattered, teachers adjusted papers, and the usual energy of an assembly buzzed through the air. The boy felt a tightness in his chest, a mix of excitement and fear. This was different from the previous day. Now, eyes were waiting for him specifically. Some students had come with curiosity, others with doubt, and some, he suspected, hoping for a mistake. But he focused, as always, on the music, on the rhythms and melodies that lived inside him. When it was his turn, he approached the piano in the center of the stage. The hall quieted as people realized he was next. The lights above made his hands glisten slightly, highlighting every subtle movement. For a moment, he closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Every nervous thought tried to surface, every fear of ridicule, but he pushed it aside. The music was stronger than fear. He started slowly, with soft, tentative notes. The first few sounds were almost like whispers, delicate and careful, drawing the audience in. Some students shifted in their seats, leaning forward unconsciously. Teachers watched silently, a few smiling knowingly. The boy's fingers moved more confidently as the music developed. Weaving a story with sound, rich in emotion, subtle in power, the notes grew in intensity, each one deliberate and meaningful. The audience was captivated, though some students tried to resist, unsure how to respond. They had expected something ordinary, perhaps even clumsy. Instead, they were confronted with something extraordinary. The music was alive, moving through the room, touching emotions that words could not reach. A few of the students who had laughed the day before were frozen, their mouths slightly open, realizing that the quiet boy they had mocked had just spoken in a language they didn't understand but immediately felt. The melody carried longing, hope, sadness, and joy all at once. A reflection of the countless hours he had spent alone, practicing, perfecting, and connecting to his inner self. Every pause, every rise and fall of the music drew the room deeper into the experience. The boy closed his eyes, not aware of the audience now, fully immersed in the world he created with sound. He played with precision, but also with feeling, letting every emotion flow through him and into the piano. It was as if the room itself had become part of the music, vibrating with the quiet power of his performance. The laughter, the whispers, the snickers, they were all gone. The hall was silent, the kind of silence that carried weight, the kind that made it impossible to look away or think of anything else. Every student, every teacher was fully present, drawn into the story he told with his fingers. It was a silence filled with awe, understanding, and unspoken respect. Some students tried to glance at each other, seeking confirmation that what they were feeling was real. Their eyes met and widened. The disbelief in their expressions slowly shifted to admiration. The boy continued, oblivious to the effect he had on everyone else. He was not performing for them. He was expressing himself fully, allowing the music to speak without concern for approval or applause. The climax of his piece approached. A section of soaring melodies and deep chords. The intensity grew, yet the music retained its elegance and control. The audience was spellbound. Teachers exchanged quiet whispers, unable to hide their amazement. Students who had once mocked him now sat in stunned silence, realizing that their assumptions had been wrong. The quiet boy who had always kept to himself had revealed something extraordinary, something powerful enough to change how they saw him and perhaps themselves, as the final note rang out. The sound lingered, filling the hall long after his fingers had left the keys. The boy opened his eyes slowly, taking in the room. He expected some reaction, perhaps hesitant applause, maybe even a few smiles. But what came was something deeper. The silence remained for a few heartbeats, the kind that presses gently but firmly, the kind that speaks louder than words ever could. Then, as if released from a spell, the room erupted. The applause was sincere, filled with awe and genuine appreciation. Students who had doubted him clapped harder, some cheering quietly, some calling out simple words of praise. Teachers clapped warmly, smiling widely, proud of his courage and talent. The boy stood, not used to this level of attention, feeling a strange mixture of humility and satisfaction. He had not sought this moment, but it had come to him nonetheless. Some students approached him afterward, eyes bright, asking how he had learned to play like that, how long he had practiced, and if he had written the music himself. He answered simply, honestly, without arrogance, explaining the hours of practice. the quiet determination, and the love for music that had always guided him. They listened, fascinated, realizing that his talent had been born from dedication, not luck. By the end of the day, the boy noticed the change everywhere. Students who had once ignored or mocked him were now cautious, respectful, curious. Even the teachers spoke to him with a different tone, encouraging him gently, acknowledging the hidden depth of his skill. He walked home with a new sense of confidence. Though it was quiet, subtle, he did not need to shout or prove anything. The music had done it for him. At home, he returned to his keyboard, inspired by the experience. He played not for recognition, but for the joy of expression. Each note felt stronger, more assured, more alive. The silence of the hall had taught him something valuable, that true expression could captivate without words, that patience and dedication could reveal something others could not imagine. As night fell, he sat quietly, letting the music flow, reflecting on the day. He realized that the silence, the awe, the attention he had received was not about him personally. It was about the truth he had expressed, the honesty of his music. That truth had a power all its own, capable of reaching people in a way that laughter and mockery never could. He went to bed that night with a sense of peace he had never known before. The music had bridged the gap between his private world and the world outside. He had found a way to be heard, to be understood, and to leave a mark without ever speaking a word. And he knew that this was only the beginning. The world had started to notice, and his journey had just begun. After the performance, the boy felt a strange mix of relief and excitement. Walking through the hallways, he noticed the way students looked at him differently. There were no sneers, no mocking whispers, only curiosity and respect. Some nodded at him, quietly acknowledging the talent they had underestimated. A few approached him cautiously, asking about the music he had played. Their questions were genuine, not teasing, and he answered simply, explaining the hours of practice, the melodies he had imagined, and the emotions he had poured into every note. It felt strange, but in a good way. For the first time, he realized people were listening, truly listening. In class, things shifted subtly. Students who had once ignored him now gave him space, and occasionally offered small compliments. Some tried to start conversations about music, asking how he learned to play, which composers he liked, and if he had written the music himself. He replied with modesty, careful not to seem boastful. He had never played for recognition, and he still did not seek it. But he had learned that people could appreciate honesty and effort when they witnessed it. The respect he received felt different from the attention others chased. It was earned quietly, through action rather than words. Teachers also began to notice more intentionally. One invited him to join a small music club that met after school, explaining that they would like to support his talent further. Another suggested he consider a future where music could play a larger role in his life. Emphasizing that his skill was rare and valuable, he listened carefully, absorbing the advice without feeling pressured. The encouragement felt genuine and unthreatening, unlike the noise of classmates who often sought to compete. Here, the focus was on growth and potential, and it excited him. After school, he returned to his keyboard at home, the weight of the day slowly settling in. He played, experimenting with new melodies inspired by the reactions he had seen. It was as if the performance had unlocked something inside him, a deeper understanding of his own capacity for expression. Each note carried confidence, emotion, and a quiet pride that he had not experienced before. The keyboard no longer felt like an instrument for practice. It had become an extension of his mind and heart, a bridge between himself and the world. Days passed and the change at school continued. The boy was no longer invisible. Some students still kept their distance, unsure of how to relate, but they no longer mocked him. Others began to approach, tentative but interested in learning from him, or simply understanding the music that had moved them. The boy found himself helping a few students with simple melodies, teaching them small patterns, and sharing the joy of creating sound. It was a new experience, giving him the ability to connect with others in a way he had never known. Even the students who had laughed the most found themselves reconsidering their assumptions. One quiet student, who had never spoken to him before, walked up and admitted that he had been wrong. He confessed that he had not expected the performance to be so powerful, and he wanted to understand how someone could create something so moving. The boy smiled gently, listening patiently, explaining the process of practice, patience, and imagination. The conversation was simple, but it built a bridge of understanding, showing that judgment could be replaced by curiosity and respect. Back in the music room, he spent hours refining his pieces. Each day, the melodies became more complex, more expressive, and more confident. He experimented with different rhythms, exploring emotions he had not dared to express before. The quiet attention of others no longer pressured him. It encouraged him. He realized that sharing his music did not diminish its value, but rather enhanced it. The music remained deeply personal, yet it could touch others in profound ways. At home, he began to write down his compositions carefully, creating a small collection of pieces that represented his journey so far. The notes were messy in places, filled with corrections and revisions, but they were honest. Each page reflected his growth, his struggles, and his triumphs. The act of writing the music down gave him a sense of permanence and accomplishment he had never felt before. The pieces were not for fame or competition. They were for him and anyone who might find meaning in them. Over time, his confidence in everyday life grew as well. He spoke more in class, offered thoughtful answers, and participated in discussions he would have previously avoided. The confidence was quiet and measured, not boastful, but it changed how he interacted with the world. People listened now, expecting insight rather than dismissing him. The shift was gradual, almost imperceptible. But it was real and transformative. As the months passed, he began performing in small school events, not for applause, but to share the music that had always been a part of him. Each performance built upon the last, revealing new layers of expression and emotion. The students who once laughed began to support him, attending performances and encouraging others to listen. The hallways and classrooms became spaces of curiosity and respect rather than ridicule. The boy had discovered a quiet influence, a way to change perceptions without confrontation or argument. He also began to consider his future differently. Music, which had always been a private passion, now seemed like a path he could pursue more seriously. Thoughts of performing beyond the school, of studying composition, and of sharing his music with a wider audience began to take shape. He understood that talent required effort, but it also required courage to share what was deeply personal. He had learned that courage slowly, step by step, through quiet determination and patience. One evening, while practicing a new composition, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. From the lonely lunches to the mocking whispers. From the quiet hallway walks to the hesitant first performance, every moment had shaped him. Every challenge had prepared him to express himself fully, honestly, and without fear. And now, the respect and acknowledgement from others reinforced the idea that staying true to oneself was more valuable than trying to fit in. He reflected on the day of the performance and the silence that followed the final note. That silence had spoken more than words ever could. It had shown him the power of music, the impact of honest expression, and the way people respond when they encounter something authentic. The memory of the silent hall remained vivid, a reminder of what could happen when one dared to reveal their true self. From that day on, he carried himself with quiet confidence. He was still the same boy who walked the hallways, tapped rhythms on his desk, and composed melodies in his room. But now, he also knew that the world could hear him, that his music had the power to touch hearts, and that authenticity had its own kind of strength. He did not need to change to be accepted. He only needed to share what he had always carried within. As the school year continued, he became a symbol of quiet perseverance. Students learned to listen more carefully, to judge less quickly, to appreciate talent that did not always shout for attention. Teachers supported his growth, encouraging him to explore his abilities further, guiding him gently without pressure. And the boy, in turn, continued to grow. Exploring the depths of his creativity, refining his music, and sharing it with those willing to listen, the journey had been long and filled with doubt. But the boy had emerged stronger and more confident. He had discovered that laughter and mockery could not diminish the truth of his talent. He had found a voice not in words, but in music, a voice that could move people, change perceptions, and connect hearts. And he knew that as long as he stayed true to himself and continued to create, that voice would continue to resonate. Quietly, powerfully, and unmistakably. Months passed, and the boy continued to grow in ways he had never imagined. The quiet confidence he had gained from performing had begun to influence not only his music, but his life in general. He walked through the hallways with a calm presence, no longer shrinking from attention, though he still preferred to observe rather than speak too much. People noticed the change, sensing that there was something different about him. Though they could not fully articulate what it was, his music had become a daily practice. Not just for performance, but as a way to process life itself. Each morning, before the noise of school began, he would sit at his keyboard at home, composing and experimenting with new melodies. These sessions were quiet, meditative, and deeply personal. He tried new styles, blending emotions he had felt, but not yet expressed. Each note carried a story, and slowly, he found that he could express not only his own experiences, but the feelings of others he had observed in the world around him.